Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a very rare Tuesday night live stream on Evangelical Dark Web. This will be the replacement of the Wednesday morning video, which I've been usually doing, but there's a lot to recap. Definitely the biggest story in Christian news over the weekend was the Crisis King conference by Right Response Ministries. How to Defeat Trash World was part of the theme of the conference. So I believe this was a big deal, big conference. I think a lot of stuff happened at this conference, and I think it will have a lasting impact on the Christian right, which is a pretty broad umbrella term for people who are Christian nationalists or Christian nationalists adjacent enough, people who just want to win. I think is a way to put it, that are also Christians. So I think there's a lot to talk about. I want you on here because you'll probably have some good questions about, what was the conference like? What was the on the ground view? And I definitely want to know what the internet was saying about the conference because the service inside the convention center was pretty bad. So I was not like on my phone a whole lot during those days. But nonetheless, my post still did the numbers. Anyway, I before I get into it, what are your kind of ethereal thoughts? Because I think that will be a lasting conference. I think that there's some stuff that happened at this conference that I think will shape the church, or at least a lot of the people in the church moving forward. What are your kind of thoughts or perceptions about what went on?
Well, I mean, for starters, we could just talk about the size of the conference being upwards of 1,000 was the number I was seeing reported online. And again, I'll just say off the bat, I wasn't necessarily as online on Saturday and Sundays, just because of all the stuff I had going on. I was on a death march on Saturday, and more or less still recovering on Sunday. So I wasn't quite on social media, but one thing I did see pointed out was that it was a large turnout as far as the crowd size go, and probably larger than what I would have anticipating if I just had to like ballpark how big this conference was off the top of my head. I probably would have said close to 500 max.
Really,
So it was 1,000 people.
give or take,
Turn
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in a lot of the pictures, you'll see open seats, but I do think they put a lot of chairs out, and people just kind of naturally spread out.
Yeah,
And
I
some
understand.
people came early, left early, or came late. Other people left early. Like Sunday was less crowded than Friday and Saturday were. So just or is it sorry Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So there's a lot to keep in mind with these types of things. I can tell you what speakers were there and when they were there and how long they stayed and stuff like that. Uh, so yeah, and already I'm seeing some people from the conference in the chat. So, good evening to you all. So, with that said,
So yeah,
yeah, let's talk about. I want to talk
size
about
was
the
one thing.
people, the crowd. Let's talk about the
All right.
crowd first. So, actually, I'll let you finish. Then we'll talk about the crowd.
Well, I'll add on to it by saying, like, again, when you get into a conference like that, that's where you actually, like, dare I say, touch grass and actually meet the anons that are on the internet that get bashed so resoundingly by, like, the likes of James White, Jordan Peterson. I mean, even, like, if you go to, like, the Steve Dace crew with Todders and being an anon basher. But people that bash anons have never touched grass. They've never actually met their audience. And if they did, they would realize that they had a lot of anons in their audience.
Yeah,
And if you go to a conference like that, you're going to see anons. You're
and it's
going to
interesting that
meet
you bring up the
anons.
Steve Dace and the bashing of the nons that's gone on their show. Todd definitely has done that, but when I was on their show, or before in the booking process for their show, they wanted to verify that I would use my actual name or that I would be willing to be public about who I actually was. Almost as if they were trying to dox me, even though I am not an anonymous person. You can't cancel me. So all this stuff is true, but nonetheless, that's kind of the impression that was gathered from the Steve Dace show. So with that said, let's dive into the crowd. Who was in the crowd? Actually, you brought up about 1,000 people first. That's the number that I reported, and a lot of other people were using while at the conference. So that's why that number is stuck. I'm not going to say I'm the greatest at estimating crowd size, but yeah, it was a good crowd size, a lot of different people. And let's talk about I would say it's probably 70% men and 30% women. And I think that's a pretty fair way to give the ratio. It's probably 70-30. Um, there are some children there. I'm surprised that people are bringing their children to this. But you know what? More power to them. More power to them. I did not bring my children to this. I flew in from out of town, and I can tell you some stories about that. Not the flight, but my overall travel experiences. But we'll save that for later. So I also want to say, like, the crowd was pretty skinny. There's maybe like two people that I thought were really fat,
So,
but
okay, so that
it was a
also
pretty
reminds me.
skinny. It was a pretty skinny crowd. Like, it was, a lot of the people were. Some of the people are like muscle bros, but other people are like,
So it wasn't like a Southern Baptist convention.
pretty skinny. Like, I'm a pretty skinny guy myself. And then along those lines,
Well, again, let's add to that.
the average height was probably taller as well. So, but
Well,
the BMI was below average
yeah,
as far as.
when you're in those kinds of crowds, and again, they weren't fatherless, angry young men that were enraged at the world like Doug Wilson like slandered these people to be, were they?
No, no. Yeah, a lot of these people. I'll get into like what my read of the people is, and the whole fatherlessness that they've been accused of. But I do want to give a compliment to Steve Dace. He is skinnier in person.
I mean, yeah,
Like, I
him.
thought he might be the fattest person. That No, he was skinny. He was skinnier in person.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
his what he's been doing has been working.
yeah. So
Same
a lot
same
of
thing
these.
with Whitlock. So
What is Zempic? Does he do Ozempic?
I don't think so.
Anyway,
He built a gym. So
so yeah, so who exactly are these people that showed up to the conference? Number one thing I would say is they're business owners. I think that's the number one. If you had to do like a plurality of careers or whatever, business owner would probably be the number one answer. And that's for a couple reasons. First, it is, conferences, going to them, pretty expensive. Like, it costs money to go to these conferences, and business owners have more money to spend at these conferences. And then if they're not like business owners, a lot of them are more or less local. A little bit difficult to say that someone's local in Texas because it's such a vast state. Like, oh, they're from Texas. Oh, Corpus Christi or El Paso. Yeah, or Amarillo, or is it Amarillo? I don't know. One thing that I know is Texas is one of those states that you have to live there to know how to pronounce all the town names. So there's a lot of that. I didn't realize since going to Texas that they renamed Fort Hood because, you can't name forts after Southern generals anymore.
yeah, thank
But
you, Congress.
yeah, uh, the woke Congress did that. So I would say that's a huge commonality. And the sponsors at the conference were mostly geared towards rich people. I got to talk to a lot of the sponsors there. There weren't that many sponsors because Joel Webbin wanted to make the sponsorship relatively exclusive,
Yeah,
and
he
that's
didn't
what he
want like
said.
50 different
He
labels.
didn't want 50 different labels. It seems like there was a cutoff on how many sponsors that he wanted because he gave each of the sponsors speaking time, but a lot of the sponsors were for investing, financial planning, and stuff like that. One of the sponsors, uh, First Liberty, something in loans. They they were about fueling political candidates, and the guy who helped found it was a Buchanan campaign staffer. So he was a big Buchanan fan, and he wants to fund more candidates like Buchanan. It seems like he was a big funder of Dusty Devers in Oklahoma, among other people. So a lot of these people in the room were movers and shakers. David Reese, who's a private equity guy, pretty nice guy in person. Again, one thing about him is he's probably like the least ecumenical person ever. which, again, I'm a lot more ecumenical than David Reese is, but that's not saying a whole lot. But he's a nice guy to hang out with. He bought there was an after party one night and he bought us IHOP. So, good guy. And a lot of theology discussions in public that anyone who's in the restaurant could listen in on because people were talking pretty loud for being at one table. Anyway, oh yeah, here's another thing. There's Jeremy points out there's one little kid just selling like a car salesman, but more trustworthy. Yeah, like the children were selling, they were hustling at this event for their sponsors. A lot of yeah, 1689 and Squirrely Joe's were both sponsors at this event. David Reese was a sponsor. A few financial companies were sponsors. And can wait, sorry. New Christendom Press was a sponsor. So a lot of things. A lot of the people were. A lot of these sponsorships were geared towards rich people, but you had the cigar, the coffee, and the books that were geared towards everybody that everyone could get in on. So, and then TrueScript was a sponsor at the event. So, oh, and then Curios Consulting, who does advertising on AD Robles' podcast, was a sponsor. I talked to them because I feel like there's some business that I could do with them. Uh, I wasn't actually not on their end, but me being a vendor of theirs if they ever need what I do in my day job. So, um, I got to do a little of multiple businesses on this trip, but overall, the people there, small business owners, this was probably for the movers and shakers of the Christian nationalist movement. It was, and a lot of people couldn't make it, obviously. Um, so those are my thoughts on the people that were there. I'm not going to say everyone there was a giga chad in terms of physical prowess, but yeah, there wasn't any there weren't really people that were screaming diabetes, and there weren't
What about
really
pastors? How many would you say were
uh
ordained?
that's a good question. I'm gonna say it was mostly laymen, but I did meet quite a few pastors as well. There's a pastor in South Carolina that I met, pretty good guy, fan of the channel. I can't say I met that many pastors, but there were a few pastors that were there that I met, but again, I can't say I met them. I don't think pastors were the majority of this conference. This was a conference that had a different vibe. It was not about missionaries and church planting or pastors learning how to preach better. It wasn't like that. It instead was a lot of laymen getting together to think about politics and such. So, yeah, that was a good question for sure. Because I would not have brought that up without you bringing that up. So awesome. So I guess we can start off with the actual conference itself. So Thursday night. This conference started on a Thursday. I flew in on a Wednesday because I can't get up in the morning all that well. I struggle getting up in the morning sometimes. I'm a night owl, not a morning person, and so I flew in on Wednesday, came in on Wednesday evening, settled in my hotel. And let me tell you, it was not a classy establishment. I walk into the hotel room, the TV is on, a light bulb is out, so the room is relatively dark. And I try to turn the TV off, and then the remote's not working. I check the remote, and the batteries were taken out of it. So this is a very shady hotel experience that I had because
Anything
Joel
crawling on the
Webben.
bed?
We'll get to what's crawling around. Don't worry. But so Joel Webben again was doing group discounts on hotels, but those were much more expensive hotels than what I was going to shell out for. We're talking $100 to $200 a night. I can't do that. I can't swing that. But as you can see, when you choose not to swing that, there are some consequences. The shower handle came off. Like, how does that happen? And I counted 4 or 5 cockroaches.
Yeah.
And they were pretty hard to identify because I'm used to like the big cockroaches. Like that's what I'm used to as far as my roach goes, like big cockroach, Wally, stuff like that, cartoon cockroaches. But these were like little ones. They had the legs of a grasshopper, the body of a beetle, and the pinchers of an earwig. And I'm like, what is that? It threw me off because I thought cockroaches were bigger and these were much smaller. But my wife's like, sends me a chart of like different breeds of cockroach. I'm like, yep, that's a cockroach then. And, I'm just flushing them and stuff. So, yeah, 4 or 5 cockroaches, from tiny to medium. So, yeah. No. The reason why it's 4 or 5 is because one of them might have been a repeat because I didn't kill one of them, and it was just too out of the way for me to want to kill. So I could have seen it again. That's why it's 4 or 5. So 3 of them got flushed, and at least, and I don't know what happened to the other 2. I might have been checking out. So, yeah. So that's what I stayed with. Back to the conference, day 1, we got Andrew Torba, and he's the only speaker on day
Torba
1.
or Isker?
Sorry, Andrew Isker. Andrew Isker. He's the only speaker on day 1, and he does an excellent roast at the end of his speech, just saying what he disagrees with each speaker about. And it's pretty funny. He's like, I'm going to let Joel and John Harris be wrong about baptism. And, Steve Dace I think he brings up eschatology, but he's like, he goes in about football, and the fact that he's a Lions fan. He talks about AD Robles is wrong for liking baseball more than football and stuff like that. So it's a pretty funny roast that he does about how he disagrees with each of the speakers there. He talks about Calvin Robinson, who will talk more about his speech in a while. Um, being wrong about the Reformation, and then gets a little bit nerdy about it and posits an alternative history in which, if the English had backed the Calvinist in France, the French Revolution wouldn't have happened. So it's pretty funny, I thought. But so Andrew Torba did a good opener because he's the inspiration for the Defeating Trash World theme in many ways, because he wrote the book on Trash World with the Boniface option, which again, as far as normie Christian books go, not that the book is written for normies or by normies, but at a reading level, your average Christian could read that book and not have any problems. Your average Christian cannot read, does not have the reading capacity for The Case for Christian Nationalism.
Yeah, I mean,
but many Christians did rise to that occasion. But the Boniface option is something that a normie Christian could read. And as far as those types of books goes, that is one of the best. So he kicked it off. Then there was an after party where they brought out a cash bar, and I here's the thing. I talked to almost all the speakers, and maybe I talked to John Harris on Thursday. He left early, actually. He wasn't there
he
on the
pulled an
final.
80 Robles.
I don't think he was there on the final day. 80 Robles does disappear a lot, but I actually talked to 80 quite a bit. We talked Sopranos. He liked the ending of Sopranos, by the way.
My kind of
which is
guy.
the correct opinion. Talked a lot about the veto plot, and just quoting like who are the favorite lines from each character in the show and stuff like that. But we had a lot of different conversations. But going back, so there's an after party, and then after the after party, there's another after party, and that's when David Reese, treated people to IHOP and didn't get back to the hotel room till like 2:00 in the morning. So that's basically the Thursday night opening announcements. Joel Webben has a habit of turning announcements into sermons, but he only really did that once because he really tried to curtail himself from doing that. But he does have a tendency to turn prayers into sermons. So it's kind of funny. If you ever listen to him pray in public, he does tend to do that. By the way, Joel Webben is way skinnier in person. Like, he's pretty skinny in person. Again, you don't expect that. Very much a bro, though. He is a bro. Very romantic sense of humor. Fun to be around. So Friday happens. Friday is an all-day event, and Calvin Robinson, I believe, was first up on Friday, and
Just keep in
he
mind that was going into the conference. That was
okay, yeah,
the biggest controversy as far as speakers go.
yeah, because Calvin Robinson not very friendly to Calvinism, even though he's an Anglican, which makes no sense because Anglicanism is historically more or less Calvinistic. Maybe not as Calvinistic as Presbyterianism, but it still is Reformed generally. Also, Roman Catholicism is condemned in many ways by the 39 articles of Anglicanism in the Book of Common Prayer. So I don't see how you can reconcile the two, but Calvin Robinson's going to proceed and power through it anyway. But his speech was about Islam and how Islam is the official religion of Trash World in the UK. And he talked at great length about what Islam is doing in the UK, about uh, how the country is just basically, this was the most depressing of the speeches. It was basically he's telling story after story about Christians being persecuted in the UK because the country's either being unwilling to uh, acknowledge, or let's use the word notice. They're being unwilling to notice the Muslim problem. And then they're also punishing and going after Christians for prayer.
And
And
that's
yeah,
a very timely speech to give, especially as the show Adolescence on Netflix sparked a national conversation overseas of them trying to paint a white child as the culprit when realistically the crime that he's on the show commits is committed by, let's say, a non-white. In there's it's for once the Netflix version is whitewashed and not the opposite.
yeah, the one time that Netflix doesn't, yeah, whitewashes a character, and it's for a
And
reason.
so, and again, Calvin making his speech on Islam being like that's just perfect timing because you have case in point.
Yeah.
They don't want to acknowledge it. Instead, they want to like blame Andrew Tate. They
No,
want to
they punish you if you do acknowledge it. You get,
yes,
and that's been a huge issue, and that's what Calvin talked about. That his speech was the most blackpilling. I will say that. Like, it's nothing against him, but it was the most blackpilling speech, and he talked about how there's only spiritual solutions to the UK's
and again,
problems because there isn't a Christian critical mass.
and yeah, and I was in a conversation over the weekend, and similar theme where the problem where you see a lot of these European right wing guys are absolutely hating on America right now. They're very doomer. Academic Agent would be one example, but there are others. And the problem with their right wing movements is that they're fundamentally atheist, and that's why they're not actually succeeding. If they actually want to have a right wing that succeeds over in Europe, you have to return to God.
Yeah, you need to invoke the power of God because you're not up against secular forces. You're not up against, it's not atheist on atheists. It's, you're asking Satan to divide his house, and that's just not going to work. And, very depressing. A lot of the big talk at the conference was about how Muslims are trying to build a town in Texas. So, the Epic City project, or whatever they're trying to call it. So that's a huge talk in the town, and that was brought up multiple times at the conference by multiple speakers. I will say this: there was no audience questions and answers at the conference. So, and I don't blame, and that's probably for the best. Let the experts choose the questions and ask them. No offense, my experience is mostly from political questions. Sorry, political events. You want the experts to ask screening questions or whatever to
Yeah,
candidates, or
you don't always want open
yeah, you don't
microphone.
always want open forum, open microphone, because the people are just gonna, a lot of times people will just give an argument and then ask a question like, do you agree with that? And yeah, it takes up a lot of time. But so there wasn't really audience participation at these events, but I think that was for the best. I think the panels had really good questions and discussions thrown. So with that said, each session also had a break in between them because they let people get up and stretch and
Yeah,
stuff
it's a
like that.
40-minute speech, 10, 15-minute break makes sense.
Yeah. So let's get into the weeds about what else happened. So, yeah, day one had the. Oh, sorry. This would be day two that we're on. Is the Calvin Robinson speech. So Steve Dace spoke after that, and I believe there was a panel discussion before that, which talked about concerns and it talked about solutions. So I thought this panel had a lot of the heavy hitters on it, but I actually thought the following panel surpassed it. Uh, it's pretty interesting. Well, let's talk about Steve Dace. I know a lot of people asked me, and so
And I
many.
have it
It seemed
written
like
down too.
everyone who went to that conference and recognized me is like, I saw you on Steve Dace, and there's a lot of encouragement as a result of that. Like, um, Oron McIntyre, gave me some encouragement. I won't just say what he said because I don't know how public that was, but he gave me some encouragement about that. Uh, uh, One of the guys with the mustache that was on stage gave me some encouragement about that. I can't remember whether it was an Ogden bro or whether it was uh, Joel Evans' right hand man. So I'm not sure which one it was, but a lot of people gave me encouragement about that. It's like they've only seen one episode of Steve Dace, and it was the one I was on, but because that was a struggle session, and I predicted that it would be. It just wasn't a struggle session the way I thought because he wanted to bring up tweets that I've never interacted with by people that I may or may not even follow on social media. Oh, so Ben Garrett did. Okay. Okay. Thank you for the correction because he was there in the chat. So anyway, that was kind of interesting. A lot of encouragement about that.
Did you actually have an interaction with Dace or no?
No. So let's get into Steve Dace. His Steve Dace did not showed up on Friday, and that was it. He didn't stick around at all. He didn't talk to anyone in the crowd that I know of. He did the panel, did the speech, went straight off to Bucky's, I guess, because that was what he tweeted about. And I'm out of here. Screw you guys. I'm going home. Like he kind of did that. But again, he is skinnier in person. I do got to say. Uh, so when he gave the speech, I was about 15 yards away. And I thought there was maybe one or two occasions, one during the panel and the other during a speech where, he might have seen me because again, this room isn't dark. It isn't dark, so where you only see like maybe the first crowd. I think you can see way
Yeah,
past that.
all the pictures seem to imply it was well lit.
Yeah, it was well lit enough to see where. Well, even still, you had the lights coming onto the stage in your face that kind of blinds you a little bit, but to where you can't see past the lights sometimes or that well. But I think he could have made me out if he was diligent in his eyesight. But he gave a pretty, I don't want to, it's a very eclectic speech. Actually, let's talk about what he said on the panel first, because what he said on the panel was actually pretty funny because he talked about his comments on Carly Fiorina during the 2016 Cruz campaign, which got them into hot water, got him and Ted Cruz into hot water because he said that she had a full vagina moment or something like that on social media, which he thought was pretty funny because it was cool when it was used on Hillary Clinton. And he talked about how even though it was funny, even though it was true, it was not prudent. And I thought that was pretty good. There was good takeaways during the panel when they discussed that. When he went to the speech, let's just say this about his speech. If you've listened to a Steve Dace speech before, you've heard a lot of the same elements. So a lot of his speech is just riffing off of old stories, common stories, uh, and stuff like that. And
He does get paid to speak at a lot of events,
yeah,
particularly like pro life events. So more
so if
like
you ever heard him talk about homeschool graduations and Jeremiah 29:11, he did that again. He talked about his marriage struggles, which apparently when he interviewed Joel Webbin and gave him the softball treatment, even though me and Joel Webbin have the same views on the Jews and all that, even though we have pretty similar views on
the
that.
Jews.
I know. he gives him the softball interview. And here it's like that scene in Big Daddy where, he's having the kids spell cat, dog, and whatever. And hip hop anonymous.
Yeah,
I
gives
did
the
like that. You give him the easy one. No, which I'm not like, butthurt about that. I'm making fun of myself here. But anyway, apparently he revealed more intimate details about his uh marital struggles on that show. And um it's pretty interesting. He didn't do that there, but you should listen to that interview that he did with Joel Webman. I have not listened to it yet, so I don't want to like give false wrongly summarize it. But his speech was a lot of things. It was a hodgepodge of a lot of stories. He talked about gatekeeping in the beginning, where he talked about someone wanted to gatekeep him, but then that person then eventually came around to Steve Dace and is one of his biggest backers. And then he wanted to say he was almost trying to be a moderating force. So Joel Webben opened up the conference by saying, there's the Overton window, then there's what the Bible says, and then says the Overton window is not close enough that we have to worry about overcorrection yet. Like that time may come, but we're not even there yet. And then Steve Dace references the struggle session that he had with me during his speech. And
how
I'm
overt was the reference? How overt is the reference?
not by name, but it's pretty obvious given the context.
So
Because
if you knew
if
of
you
it,
knew, you knew.
yeah.
And he basically struggle sessions the audience about going too far. He creates this false dilemma. It's a false dilemma, not a dichotomy, about us not loving our neighbors enough and stuff like that. But first of all, we got to remember what loving your neighbor is. It's love your neighbor as yourself. So that's a conditional love. It's on the condition of yourself, do unto others as you would have done unto you. And I got to say, I don't mind people right wing edge lording onto me. I don't mind that. I want them to do unto me as I do unto them. So there's no violation of loving your neighbor as yourself when you right wing edgelord, if that is how you want to be loved.
I mean, at the end of the day, we got to remember right wing edgelords helped Trump win an election.
Indeed.
Again, they're eating the cats and the dogs was said on a debate stage because of right wing edgelords.
Yeah. So Steve Dace gave that, and I think for that reason, I would say he had the weakest speech. Other than you can maybe argue that David Reese's theonomy sales pitch, you could argue that might have been the weakest speech. But we'll get to that in a second. But there was something I really liked about that speech that I'll get to. Were you able to watch any of it, or is that something that you had to pay for?
I do not have.
Okay.
I would not have had time, nor did I thought it would have been behind the paywall because I think someone said it was a Patreon exclusive.
Okay. So yeah, Steve Dace is making. Yeah, everyone was asking. Did you catch that reference about Steve Dace made about you, or
Oh
what?
wow! So
Everyone
again,
wanted
you
to know
got
what I
people.
thought about what Steve Dace talked about, and I tweeted out what I thought, which was, Steve Dace referenced the struggle session during his, kind of creating the false dilemma about loving your neighbor. But other than that, good speech. It was a great speech because he did talk about, he did provide some wisdom, after that. So that was in the middle of his speech. But after that, he closed really strong. He didn't give a bad speech. Let me just read what my notes are on that. Uh, it was compelling and highlighted his personal journey, both successes and failure. So I thought that was fine. But again, his opening point about not being gatekeepers, and then he goes on a diatribe about involving gatekeeping. And he's 15 yards from me. I'm very stoic in the crowd. Like I didn't react. I didn't you wouldn't have seen a facial expression from me when he said that. But anyway, that's Steve Dace. If you've heard Steve Dace's speech, you would have heard a lot of the same beats, but it's good. it's good. Uh, he's a very good speaker. So a lot of people really appreciated him because the talent is there. I do want to say nobody special says if you're not willing to go too far, you'll never go far enough. Cheal Sanan. I don't know who that is who made the quote, but yes, they're kind of correct. Good, and thank you for the super chat as well. So, moving on, after him was Eric Kahn, who basically
Because this was the speech.
counter signaled Steve Dace, I think.
This was the speech that was talked about as of confronting the Longhouse. I think
Yes, this was
that's the reputation it had on the internet.
so it's pretty funny because he talked about the history of the Longhouse. Eric Kahn did, and it's one of the ongoing jokes at the conference was that Eric Kahn was not nearly as controversial as Joel Webbin anymore. Like Joel Webbin was so much more controversial. He was now the most hated person at the conference and not Eric Kahn, which I guess used to be the case, such as at last year's conference, where Doug Wilson spoke and some other people spoke. So Eric Kahn, not to be outdone, goes on a speech attacking the Longhouse, and he's not exactly Baptist. He didn't stick to a 3-point thing. He had like 11 ways to destroy and defeat the Longhouse. And yeah, this is a good mention by Jeremy Kearns. He did an early life check on like one of the people from from the Frankfurt School, particularly who played a role in feminism and stuff like that. So he early life checked him during his speech. But he talked about the history of the Longhouse. He talked about how C.S. Lewis was critical of the Longhouse in his writing of The Silver Chair with the headmaster of the school, who was eventually made a minister of parliament, and kind of a joke that C.S. Lewis wrote at the end of that book. And he discussed practical solutions for defeating the Longhouse, such as fostering a cultural indifference to gynocratic norms. And this is broadly summarized by the J.D. Vance quote, I don't really care, Margaret, or is that the exact quote? I'm not word perfect, or, but I strive to be. So the I don't really care, Margaret line was kind of an emphasis of that speech. He talked about not caring about gynocratic norms. He talked about vibing with the boys and stuff like that, forming male friendships, uh, and just practical ways to defeat the Longhouse, which is a shorthand term for gynocratic rule. I like this statistics man, Eric Controversial. And yes, nice. I remember you. I remember you from the conference. Yes, I met the Anons. I met the subs,
Now,
and
keep in
even a
mind,
patron or two.
when it comes to defeating the Longhouse, I mean, everyone I talk about this to, and again, I'm not the originator of this idea, but once it was told to me, I passed it on and kind of, you know, even written it in a couple of articles over the year. And it is that confronting women is more controversial than talking about the Jews, even in conservative circles, where one group kind of has a lot of influence and dominance over the space. Talking about women is more controversial and more of a third rail than talking about the Jews.
Yeah, I mean, even I like, and Eric Kahn actually inadvertently did both. But I was like, man, he's going pretty hard. I'm like, shouldn't he say some more couch language to, because there are women at this conference. You want to empower them as well in ways that feminism does not. Like actually encouraging people to embrace actual femininity, so to speak, is what I'm getting at. But he went hard against the Longhouse and against feminism, against gynocratic rule, and how tyrannical it is, and how it leads to decadence and evil. It's ultimately oppressive to men. And he says that men need to rise up and shake off the shackles of gynocratic norms. So it was a very rousing speech, and that was some hype there. Uh, he cranked it up to 11. And then the night concludes with Aaron McIntyre. So he spoke about elite theory. And I wrote this at the time. This was the wonkiest of the speeches. he discussed the need for Christians to take their place in cultural elites. So he talked a lot about the lions and foxes. If you're familiar with Aaron McIntyre's content, you know what that is.
Yeah, he talks a lot about this in Total State. That's one of probably the prevailing concepts is the, I guess, I don't know if it's Pareto that comes up with lions and foxes, but yes.
So he talked about that. He rallied us not to cancel our own due to liberal standards. So this is another counter signal against Steve Dace, who would cancel people for over liberal standards, like Michael Spangler's tweets that other people may or may not have interacted with. So anyway, and then saying that we should follow the standards of Christ instead. So Oren McIntyre doesn't say that we shouldn't cancel anyone on the right. He says that they should be canceled according to standards of Christ, not man standards. Okay, yeah, Jeremy confirms that it was Pareto and his lions and foxes.
Yeah. See, I read his book. I remember.
You did the reading. He does the reading around
And
here.
again,
he's like our Wesley Todd.
So Total State, for those that don't know, it is a good primer if you don't want to do all of the reading and you just want to get a baseline that helps you understand. Total State is actually a very good book. It kind of condenses like 10 different books into one. So it's very digestible, very easy to read. It's almost too short because I wanted it to go on another 100 pages. But yeah, if you're just looking for a good primer, it's a very good book for that.
Right. So, and he gave a very good speech. Again, I tweeted this at the time, but everyone in that room was smarter for having listened to Aaron McIntyre talk. And yeah, I took some good pictures because again, I'm 15 yards away. There was like a unofficial assigned seating if you just marked your territory at this event. And then McIntyre is often mild-mannered with a clinical approach to theory, but he was pretty animated. He got pretty fired up in the middle, towards the end of his speech. When he gets passionate about Christianity, even though again, if you've watched his show, he's pretty mild-mannered. He's pretty clinical apathy. He has a clinical apathy towards a lot of the subject material, but he gets pretty passionate about Christ, about Christianity. I'll read this super chat by Nobody Special. Y'all should work out a role to deal with Doug and James since y'all do most of their show prep. I don't know how true that is, but I don't want to know how true that is because the dividing line is a lot of stuff to list, a lot of crap to wade through into in order to get to the good stuff or the meaty stuff that's clippable. I don't know how one of our guys does that. But anyway, he's on it. So that's day 2. And after day 2, I went partying with the boys. We went to a bar out in Temple, Texas, and, had some fun. Had some fun there. Broed it up, talked with the guys, made some friends, stuff like that. Smoked some cigars. And Joel Webbin actually gave me my first cigar. There. No homo. But anyway, so he cut my cigar and, I tried it. I will say this about cigars. I don't think the cigar life is for me. There is just saying, like the reformed bro stereotype about mustache or beards or mustaches, if you're Andrew Isker, and then smoking cigars. Like, I don't really feel anything while smoking a cigar except really cool. But afterwards, I did feel a little sick. But yeah, there's some cigars and shuffleboard. But yeah, all I felt was super cool and then sick afterwards. So it's like, I don't know. I'm like, how much nicotine's in these things? So I know you're not supposed to go from like the 6 milligrams of Zyn. If you're not supposed to try the 15 milligrams of Zyn on your first try or whatever, or the knickknacks or whichever brand you use. There's like a couple different brands that are very popular right now. And by the way, when I was at the airport, there was these frat bros that were flying into Pittsburgh. They were coming to the gate. So they're going to they got to the airport really early because they got to the gate while we were getting boarded for the next flight. So they were super early to the airport, and they're popping nicotine pouches in their mouths. I'm like, these are our guys. But anyway, uh, the West Virginia Bros. Um, so with that said, cigars, shuffleboard. I am not good at shuffleboard, but I think with time I will become a boss at it. But anyway, fun time at the bar, uh, and that was the end of Friday. So I didn't get back to the hotel room till like past 1 o'clock. And the funny thing is, I drained my battery so much that I barely got back to the hotel. I had 2% left, and I needed GPS to get there, and the GPS was not doing me right in Temple at night. So anyway, day 3. Let's get to day 3. And this day was basically highlighted by Stephen Wolf versus David Reese. There was a panel at the beginning, and before I talk about that, I will say Aaron McIntyre left the conference after this. I didn't see him on Saturday at all. Like I said about Steve Dace, he showed up for what he was doing, and then zoop, he was out. Dusty Devers couldn't make it to the conference because of an undisclosed personal emergency, I should say. And then uh, Brian Sauvé could not make the conference, but that was
He had
already
a kid, right?
pre-announced.
Because he just
Yeah, he just had to have a kid. Like how dare he? How dare his wife give birth uh at all? Like why didn't he do his family
hold it
planning
in for
stuff?
another 2 months.
Yeah, exactly. Because everyone wants to be 46 weeks pregnant or whatever. So yeah, that's what happened there. I'm just kidding. Congratulations, Brian. You deserve it. We never spoken and because of that, we've never spoken. But I met all the Ogden Bros, very chill people. I got Haunted Cosmos while I was there. That was one of the only books I bought or got at the conference, and I'll do a review on that when the time is right. So anyway, day 3. Uh, it began with a panel, and there was a lot of wisdom for the times. The beginning of the conversation was about whether Christian nationalism was dead or not. And guess who was there? The one, the only Thomas Acord. He made a surprise appearance in his resurgence. So he was one of the people that was given like a table to sell his book at this conference. And
That one made the rounds on the internet because of
so how did the
Eric
internet react
Kahn.
to this?
Eric Kahn put it out, and then you had some angry, I guess, women out there that were just like, "How dare you?" And then I think I'm not sure if that was when Joel Berry was trying to do that. I'm going to debunk his book, and it's just because it's a book of quotes of other books or
Yeah, it's
something.
an anthology
Yeah,
of quotes and stuff. So it's not even there's nothing to debunk unless you want to like go after all these famous
Aristotle.
Christians for what they believed about this. But anyway, um, yeah. So he was a surprise guest on the panel. So it was a pretty packed panel. There was like 7 or 8 guys on there, and he was a surprise guest because Joe Webbin has a flair for the dramatics, uh, and he knows how to. He knows. I don't want to say he knows how to be an entertainer because I'll talk about the worship service afterwards. So we'll get to that as well because I think that's a fair way to conclude um, the discussion of this is the worship service that was on Sunday, but we're on Saturday right now. And Thomas Acord, just to give some background, he was canceled because he had some burner accounts that said some really hilarious things, and he just wasn't honest about it at the time. And he should have been more honest about it. I think that was sinful. But what he said was hilarious, and we should not just cancel people for comedy. Uh,
No,
those
I
are my
mean he's
views.
also made fun of mental health, and that's needed.
Yeah. So I really liked I appreciate the guy, and I appreciate the jokes from back in the day because that stuff was hilarious, and I won't repeat it, but you can go look up what he said in his burner account that got people so mad. And Thomas Acord during this made a great emphasis on the Great Commission's call to baptize and disciple nations, means that Christian nationalism will never die as a concept. What's interesting about this was he invoked John Piper. And John Piper's an anti-Christian nationalist because he's an Anabaptist. He's not really a Baptist. He's only Calvinistic because the whole Young, Restless, and Reform movement is about Anabaptist discovering Calvinism. That's really what the YRR is. So John Piper is a part of that, maybe the granddaddy of it in some ways. It's interesting that you're making a case or an argument for Christian nationalism using John Piper. And that to me is funny. And then I also want to talk about some advice that Eddie Robles gave. Eddie Robles also highlighted that dead things are ignored and not continuously derided as dead. So if Christian nationalism was actually dead, they would just not talk about it. Instead, they're talking about it because it's not dead, but they're trying to project its own death onto it.
Oh, it's the idea. It's kind of like the concept of living in someone's head rent free, or even the idea that we attribute quotes to people that they didn't actually say, that person is so magnanimous in history that they get quotes credited to them even though they didn't actually say them.
Oh, I thought we were going to talk about getting credited for tweets that you didn't actually make.
Oh,
but anyway,
well, we could go there.
We could. Anyway, Eddie Robles also highlighted some good wisdom, and this was very impactful and good advice for anyone on the right. And I wanted to share this. He talked about Christians should not expect pastors to be more based than they are, but they should look for pastors who are loyal to their parishioners, who will have their back. This was great advice, and it's advice that I follow in my daily life. It's advice that, because I'll just say this about my pastor. He's not as right-wing as me. And the elders aren't as right-wing as me. And that's fine. Find a church that will have your back, that won't cancel you. Find a church with a community that you can really be a part of. You don't have to find the perfect pastor who's right-wing in all the ways that you are. Those pastors do exist, so if you can find that, good on you. Good on you. But it might be a far drive. Because there are people that have done that. Like there's that one lady who is like something of a social media influencer herself, but like all female trad wife influencers are just drama queens. And she had a cup of coffee in Joel Webbin's church and is now, and by that I mean like she lived in Texas for like 6 months and maybe visited 4 times in 6 months. So, and now she's converting to Catholicism so she can just be a Catholic and probably not take that faith seriously anyway. So that's my thoughts on that. So you have some people. So don't be like her is what I'm saying. Don't be like her. Find a church that you can be a part of, and the pastor doesn't have to be as based as you are, but find someone that's loyal. And because loyalty is a virtue these days. Loyalty is, it's what Trump looks for.
Yeah, I mean, there's a
supposedly.
reason the guy that gets shot in the head is looking for people to be loyal around him. I mean, you don't want to be Caesar getting, 22 stab wounds.
23, I think.
23.
But very superficial stab wounds, which makes you die slower if you think about it. So that was very good advice. I wanted to highlight that. Stephen Wolfe then gave a riveting lecture on the Christian Prince. He was part of why this was riveting is because it was a short speech. Like he maybe only took half an hour when he had an hour slot. He highlighted the historic usage of the term Christian Prince, which I'm sure you know all about. Wolfe discussed how conservatives like personified power that can be seen in a representative, and liberals prefer implied and untraceable power, embodied by the question who was actually running the Biden administration. So remember, everyone was like, who's running the Biden administration? Well, this is how liberals operate, and is more implied, hidden behind the curtain type of power. That's what liberals prefer. Conservatives prefer the king. Conservatives prefer the strong man. We prefer to actually know who's in charge. But and he highlighted that as a difference between conservatives and liberals. And he highlighted that the Christian prince is a great man. And he said, not all of us will be great men. Not all of us will even be among the few, uh, great of the few, or so, something like that. So there's great men. And he talked about, I'll use Robert E. Lee as one of the examples of a great man that he said. And then he talked about how the people around him, like Stonewall Jackson, were among the few. There's the great, then there's a few. But then he also talked about that all of us can be great, are called to greatness in our own capacities, in our own ways, and the areas in our lives that we can control. We're called to be great fathers. We're called to be great pastors. Some of us. We're called to be great churchmen. We're called to be great men of character and maybe not renown, but certainly character. So it was a very good speech. This was one of the most academic of the speeches. And then David Reese talked.
I mean, there is a lot to be said about the concept
Okay.
of
Yeah.
conservatism, true conservatism. Knowing who's in charge, knowing who you can go to, because at the end of the day, what the reason monarchy is a better system than democracy is because it's easier to pressure the king than it is to pressure your representatives in Congress to do what you want. Because all you have to do is apply pressure to one person versus applying pressure to a majority of 500. So that's why it's fundamentally better to have a monarchy than a democracy.
Okay. Yes, I would agree. And there's also the
And
concept of subsidiarity, which democracy doesn't really allow nearly as much. Because
so,
one king can't exercise that much power. They need to have some sense of
yes, there's
subsidiarity.
always going to be some form of oligarchy of, the king has to have nobles. His power is not absolute, regardless of what,
High crown authority in CK3, man.
like, yeah, okay, Bloody Mary did her thing. Well, yeah, but she couldn't sustain, that's not a sustainable course. So
And
yes, people
Aaron
might
McIntyre,
suffer.
he talked about that, about strong power not being able to last very long.
Which is why it's important to understand political theory before, when having these conversations. That strong power, yeah, it's not a sustainable course. You can't be Emperor Nero or Domitian demanding everyone pay the tax and have the mark. You can't do
Diocletian.
that forever. Or yeah, Diocletian.
Yeah.
Because again, the fact that you have to do that shows that your power is actually weak. It's kind of it's a paradox.
So David Reese was afterwards, and he was the only one who used slides, by the way. He gave a mini sermon on the parable in Judges 9, where the productive trees refused to rule, and so the bramble bush ruled instead. Reese urged Christians to seek and accept power and its accompanying responsibility. And when I tweeted about this, that's what I wanted to focus on because, I thought that part was very profound. He also did like a sort of a sales pitch on theonomy, which I there's some things that he said that I don't agree with. Like Genesis 9 is not the beginning of human governance. It's not the beginning of the civil magistrate. I think that's a
That's a
complete
very
yes,
that's a
that's a
dispensational
dispensational
read.
argument. Yes.
Because it's hard to
And
say that there wasn't at the very minimum patriarchal rule before and after the flood. Because I imagine Noah was functionally a king, or at the very least, he was like the king of kings. So long as he was alive, like he was untouchable. He was like a made man.
I don't know because he was alive while he
Yeah, I
died
understand.
during the life of Isaac.
I understand that, but like no one was. I imagine he wasn't subject to anyone.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So even though he might have been like in his remote area, like no one was gonna like mess with him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But with that said, he talked about the bramble bush being maybe not useless, but it was a function of judgment because this is in the story of Judges, you have Abimelech who makes himself king. So there actually were kings during the time of Judges. It just wasn't very good. Or some of the judges ruled as kings, like Gideon was functionally a king while he was alive. And he had many sons and many wives. Like the dude had he spread his seed. And then Abimelech comes and kills all but one of his sons and makes himself king. And this is where the surviving son of Abimelech gives this parable. And that's the context that these worthless men put Abimelech in charge. And but yeah, that point that David Reese brings up did not make sense. Do not agree with it. It's a you like you said, and I was gonna say it's a dispensationalist read of the text to say that human government did not exist prior to the fall or prior to the flood. Uh, because I like I don't want to overstate the fractions here, but isn't like half or maybe a third of human history is pre-flood?
I mean, I think it's 1,500 years, give or take. But I mean, again, when you talk about the sheer volume of people that could have existed then, the fact that the world was a very violent place, so that probably would imply a very tribal,
I think the
very
pyramids,
warlord like
they made the
environment.
pyramids and other monolithic structures.
Well, give or take. Oh, yeah, I mean that's part of the argument. If those are
I'm gonna bet
prelapse,
on the
sorry,
pyramids being
if,
flood,
but yeah, if
pre-flood.
those are pre-lapsarian, then that would probably
Pre-deluge is the
require,
word,
or
right?
sorry, pre-deluge. Lapsarian
Yeah.
is fall. Um,
But yeah, Stephen Wolfe makes the argument that human government would have existed in a prelapsarian
and again, it would
world.
be because the fifth commandment is in the heart. So the fifth commandment is from which Romans 13 comes from. It's also the same commandment that Roman or Ephesians 5:23 comes from. First Peter 3 comes from. Like all of that is enjoined into the fifth commandment, as because that's all that embodies all human authority.
So let's see. Oh, so you were okay. So you were also there at IHOP. Yeah. Okay. So then they had a debate, and I thought the debate went really well. It was a very cordial debate. Do you have any other notes on this part? So yeah, the debate was pretty interesting. David Reese. So they debated the role of government to police. So actually, let's talk about the first half of the debate. Half of the debate focused on the epistemological claims, and the other half focused on the practical role of government. The epistemological claims made by both Reese and Wolf were compelling. So it's like, oh, I agree when Reese speaks, and then when Wolf speaks, it's like, oh, I agree, and that's kind of how that part of the debate went.
So
This
there's
part of the debate,
a lot of agreement. There wasn't necessarily difference in terms of how they read the text. It's just
well,
maybe
it's not even that. It's like both of what they say is kind of true, and they certainly present it in a true way. But here's the thing: I don't think the epistemology matters. I really don't, because in political science, like, what happens when the rubber meets the road? You might have all your your dotted i's and crossed t's, but when if the system doesn't hold up when it actually is time for practical application, it doesn't matter. So they debated the role of the government to police roads and regulate land and perform building inspections. To much applause, Reese criticized American bureaucracy's inability to have dominion over land, highlighting the government's ownership of Arizona land, which inflates real estate prices and prevents development. He made a comment about deserts being a curse, and how de-desertifying, um, and terraforming desert land is a good thing and a blessing from God. Stephen Wolf countered and pointed out that American bureaucracy is notoriously bad, but this is not how other nations view or experience bureaucracy. I don't know if you have a comment on that.
yeah. I mean, because Wolf caught some flack from a bunch of let's just be honest, retarded people that can't understand history, science, and they can't think out. They can't think outside of categories, and the idea of any form of collectivization is seen as communism to a lot of these people. Because he made the comment about universal health care, and that universal health care, if a country wanted to do universal health care, and then that's within their right. But he's not actually saying that every country should have universal health care. He's saying
And
if it
he
works for
explicitly
your,
say America shouldn't.
yes. But people don't understand how, like, the idea that, oh, I
They don't know
shouldn't. It's a very they have a
hypotheticals work.
well, they have a very libertarian idea when it comes to just anything. I mean, the same argument for whether healthcare is should be universal is the same argument for whether universal or schooling should be universalized as well, where at one point, yeah, there was, the idea of having everyone go to school was actually a very good idea. The problem then becomes, okay, the schools were corrupted over time because of poor maintenance. And, obviously there are other alternatives which have arisen, like homeschooling.
Yeah, but
That,
we still, by definition, have universal schooling in the United
yes.
States because I believe universal healthcare means that everyone has healthcare.
Yeah. I mean, again, I mean, the
What
biggest,
a lot of people think is single payer, which means that the government pays for everyone's health insurance.
but there seems to be like this idea that even the idea of like whether there's socialized healthcare or even socialized social security, like retirement, are theological debates when in reality they're not. They're political debates. They're purely in the realm of political. It goes back to the whole climate change is not a biblical debate so much as it is a scientific debate. The merits of the claims are
I mean, I
strictly
might think
scientific.
it's a biblical debate because I believe it's a liberal eschatology,
Well, I
but
understand
I'm
that
going in a
part of it.
different direction than most people do.
But I mean, when you're talking about the claims that the greenhouse gases warming the earth, that's strictly a scientific claim.
Yeah. I mean, let's avoid getting that YouTube disclaimer at the top on climate change. But anyway, because I can go off about, and I probably have when I discuss things like Gavin Ortland being a, Green New Deal supporter or
Like
whatever.
you can argue against the policy of something just by the merits of whether it would be effective or not effective.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to turn into a theological debate.
Right. And I
And
mean,
that's
and
pretty much Stephen
yeah,
Wolf's, an extension of Stephen Wolf's claim that American bureaucracy is uniquely bad. Doesn't mean that everyone in the world has bad bureaucracy. In
the
fact, if you read the
Persians,
Bible, Nebuchadnezzar had great bureaucracy.
yeah, and
And
so
he's
did the
actually known in
Persians.
history of having good systems.
So David Reese, using theonomy, argues that the government does not have the right to hold public land, and that the government's role in policing roads stems from their ownership of them, and traffic laws were akin to trespassing. Now, this was kind of like a weird argument. It kind of seemed like a contradiction to say that the government owns the roads so they can police them how they see fit because of trespassing, which, by the way, I don't recall a Bible verse against trespassing.
Well, I mean, the problem is
But I also think that's a self-own when you're arguing that the government shouldn't have ownership of land and then say that the government owns the roads, so therefore
yeah,
they
but the
can
problem is you're
police
separating
them.
the government from the people. So
And
you're saying
that's
the government owns the road when in reality it's the people that own the road.
yes, I think that's a good
So,
point. And yeah, when I've talked online about this issue before, it's like I think public land's a good thing because hunting is good, but preserving game so that people can hunt is also good. So government land, I think, has national parks is good. I think it's good not to just uh, use up all our land resources without planning for the future and
yeah,
incremental
conservation
development,
is a conservative value.
conservation. Yeah, so there's nothing wrong with that, but some people would privatize all the land, and yeah, guess what? You're just going to end up with a lot of black rocks type
Or if you
situation.
don't have privatized land, you have tragedy of the commons, which if you don't know what that is,
Read
just
the Lorax.
yes, the Lorax.
So
So if no one owns the land, then that means people will just abuse the land.
right. This was also so David Reese also applied this logic to littering, which again, there's no Bible verse on littering either. I don't see how littering and trespassing you extrapolate one into the other. Wolf asserted that littering was a crime against the eyes of people. Like we have to look at that trash, and that's like he said, that's a crime basically. I thought that was a pretty fun argument. And then Wolf asserted that here's one crux of the debate. Wolf asserted that the the government, the civil magistrate, had the power to create malum prohibitum laws, which means that there's malum per se, right? Malum se, or so things that are wrong in and of themselves, and then there's things that are wrong because they're against the rules. So that's malum prohibitum. Wolf believes that the civil magistrate can create malum prohibitum laws. David Reese does not. He believes that the legal system needs to react to offenses rather than train and coach behavior in any capacity. other than malum se. Um, so Wolf believes that things like large lakes could not simply be regulated could not simply be regulated via property rights and were common property. So property rights were not sufficient to regulate things like lakes or, a lot of other things like, but lakes were probably the primary example.
And just to add on to that, that deals with economics, the concept of externality. So it's the idea of the second and third order effects of an individual action. So the government, or the public, or the collective, is able to basically operate and regulate in a manner that controls for second and third order effects. So those externalities. So, and basically, the idea of property rights doesn't necessarily guarantee that.
So yeah, I took business law in high school, which is actually harder than business law in college. Fun fact. And you learn more. But anyway, Wolf asserted that California has the right to ensure that a parking garage can withstand a 7.0 earthquake, whereas David Reese believes that the law should be merely punitive. So if the parking garage collapses, you punish the person who built it or the property owner.
Which I'm very shocked that that's his argument, because that's not a very convincing argument in regards to trying to convince people to be theonomist. Because if
Yeah,
anything,
because
that's kind
usually,
of a
like, oh, there's so many instructions on how to build the temple.
because normally,
Therefore, building laws.
or even the whole ledge thing, where you shall have a ledge on your roof to prevent someone from falling over. So you would say that would at least be a standard from which you can derive building codes.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually, yeah, you got to jump through the hoops of extrapolating
So
that
I mean,
first
it's
to get to this. But yes, yes. And because here's the thing, this is where natural law sort of has an advantage is yes, we know these things. We can understand these things. And the Bible is just reinforcing common sense. Like, it's not like people did not know. Uh, so when Cain killed Abel, uh, it's not like God had given the command that murder was sinful, but it was obvious that it was sinful. So anyway, and that's kind of like the thing about theonomy is that it treats nothing was wrong until God said it was wrong explicitly in divine revelation. I'm not really convinced that that's the case. Um, and I kind of said that who people thought won this debate was directly correlated to their views on public land, but the two sides had much to agree with, a factor that should not be overlooked. So there's a lot of agreement between the
yeah,
two.
because it sounds like you're saying they had a lot of agreements on epistemology. Just it's just when it gets down to the meat and the nitty gritty, that's where the disagreements go, and it's more technicality. Which, again, I mean, if you're looking at a system that better explains the world, I mean, I think Wolf. It sounds like Wolf probably had that, especially when you start using the Latin phrases, because the Romans had a lot of systems in place. The Romans had standard designs for military camps. Even their hospitals or infirmaries had a standard design. So is this from some divine law, or is this simply from best practices?
Yeah, I want to highlight this one as well. Bishop of the Railway for $5 Canadian or pesos. I don't know how much that's worth anymore with all the trade wars going on. I hear that the Vietnamese dong is no longer strong. It says at its weakest point against the dollar. Anyway, I'm sure you can make a joke about that. But the Canadian dollar. All right. Reese's anti-monarchy slant in his Armored Republic ads are cringe. Yeah, because he owns Armored Republic because that's one of the companies that's owned by Reese, the Reese Fund. Which again, David Reese is very valuable on our side. I think he's a brother. I think he's wrong about a lot of things, right about a lot of things. But he's pretty useful on our side. Just saying, he's a weapon. Uh, But yeah, I agree that you can't really use the Bible to oppose monarchy as a system of government. I think that's kind of impossible.
Or authoritarianism in general.
Yeah, and that's not to say totalitarianism. Authoritarian, just means that you have a government that exerts authority. Uh, Parents should be at least a little bit authoritarian towards their kids, not totalitarian, not tyrannical, but they
Yeah, I mean, again, you'll tell your children it's a dictatorship. You might use the word benevolent in front of that, but
the benevolent dictatorship is probably the most ideal form of government ever uh, made. Anyway, but I think that might have come up a little bit during the debate. Uh, but that was the debate. I think that's a pretty fair summary of the debate. But I didn't give too many of my personal thoughts. Oh, I did in this, but when I wrote the article on this, which I kind of read a little bit, I didn't give my personal thoughts in the article because, again, I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to promote the event because this was a very cordial debate. These two people are friends, even though they disagree on stuff. And people were hungry for these type of ideas to be hashed out. Why people in other reformed camps don't want to hash out ideas, don't want to get on a stage with somebody, I don't know, because people want that. People want the unity. People want the unity as well as the debating of ideas. Um, you're
yeah,
just
the worst thing the whole right wing can do is purity spiral. Like, I mean, there's a lot of talk going on and maybe sentiments about, are we going too far, blah, blah, blah. No, the worst thing we can do right now is purity spiral.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it because we don't need to cancel David Reese because he has some cringe ideas and Stephen Wolf. Uh, I think he's a thought leader, but he's definitely not everyone. He's a thought leader that's so thoughtful that he's not everyone's cup of tea because he's a very thoughtful individual. Uh, and he's also, one of those moderate centrists. That's another running joke at the conference was that we're all just moderate centrists here, and we're not crazy. We're just moderate centrists. Which I want to say CJ Angle started that, but he started that joke online, but that was a running joke at the conference. Uh, let's see. Trying to see. We got some comments to catch up on. If you see any questions, we can dive into that. But what happened after that? Oh, afterwards, I hung out with the bros and we went to Texas Roadhouse in Texas. So if that's kind of like that to me is a little ironic because I actually have a Texas Roadhouse like very close to where I live. So it's a special occasion because that restaurant's always packed. But anyway, going to Texas Roadhouse in Texas, uh, pretty fun time. Yeah, I got to do a lot of yeehawing and stuff.
All right,
So
so we got some questions. So this one's a super chat by Nobody Special, $5 US. Are we allowed to say white boy summer or is that co opted now by wackos? I would say we should continue saying it.
yeah, I know.
I don't even think it's been co opted by wackos unless you want to just say all the weird anons online are wackos. But
I like the Holden brothers
I mean, as far
and
as I'm concerned,
William Swallows. I like him too.
I mean, it goes beyond them. But as far as I'm concerned, that's actually a positive means of co-opting something. Because when I first heard the term, I probably was a little put off by it myself, simply because it seemed very fratty. But at the same time, fraternal.
Same. But let me just say, white man. Yeah, I'm not Spider Boy. I'm Spider Man. Which I don't know how Marvel missed that joke. Maybe they had it, but yeah, I feel like you got to make those types of jokes. Tom Holland. Anyway.
Yeah, but trying to think. So yeah, I think it's an excellent example of something that's been co-opted. Again, having fun, being the Jolly Warriors is actually a very positive element for any movement. We're not just and the idea of us being characterized as disaffected, because yeah, a lot of us might be disaffected with DEI and all kinds of stuff, the economy, the housing crisis, all these other issues. But the idea that we are having fun in the meantime is actually a very positive sign. And again, there does need to be at least some earthly optimism to help get you through the day. While again, obviously, the Lord is where you get your eternal optimism from.
Right. And along those lines, you said about So Eric Kahn talked about defeating the longhouse, and White Boy Summer is part of how we defeat the longhouse. So I believe that is a useful term moving forward, and I'll be more of a participant. I remember last summer I went to Bucky's for the first time, and that was my White Boy Summer pilgrimage. And we got an image next to the beaver while in Temple, Texas, because they had a Bucky's right next to the convention center. Like you turn right, and there it is, right down the street. So, what are the odds? I mean, maybe in Texas they're higher because Bucky's is from Texas, but there's only one Bucky's in Missouri that I know of, and it's in Springfield, and you had to drive 400 miles to get to it. And you see the signs.
All right, so here's the next one. Kind of coincides with something I had because you did say you met Chocolate Knox,
Chocolate Knox was there.
but obviously he's probably the only one from Moscow I've heard that
And
was there.
he's on David Reese's level in a lot of ways. So,
So,
they're both very very, I don't want to say cage stage reform bros, but yeah. Fun time at the IHOP is what we had. So, yeah.
but I guess this question, what was the consensus on Moscow?
Okay.
And that more refers to the sentiment of the crowd.
Okay. Good question.
Because again, was anyone talking
So,
about Doug?
what I hear is that a lot of people in Doug Wilson's church watch the people that were on stage. They're into the Ogden Bros. They're into Joel Webbin, is what I hear. So, Doug Wilson, he, I don't think he's winning the fight. But at the same time, if he's going to have a fight, I don't think he's going to win because. But actually, let me just be a little bit more clear. I don't think Doug Wilson's going to strong arm his congregation to not listen to certain people. I don't think he's going to do that. He does kind of do it on the internet, but
You think
what
he
I
keeps
hear,
that on the web, not on the pulpit?
what I hear is that he's a grandfatherly figure. He's not like your professor that's going to fail you and give you bad grades.
And again, that's his personal demeanor. That's.
I want to put a pause on the questions, although I see some questions. Actually, I'll answer this because it's related to that. Did Chocolate Knox avoid signing the required Antioch Declaration? Again, his signature is not on it. Neither is Joe Rigney's, who's coming out with a big book, or who came out with a big book about the not toxic empathy, the sin of empathy. We did the live stream, the sin of toxic empathy. So, I mixed those two and still a little mixed into my head. So let's talk about the worship on Sunday morning. And all these days, I did not sleep very well at the hotel because it got cold. It got cold in Texas. I left Maryland. It was bad. I was thinking I'm leaving Maryland and the weather is going to be much nicer in Texas, but it got colder in Maryland than it was in Texas where I was. And I had to run heat in my hotel room and it still was not warm enough. Man, I'm not used to sleeping in bed alone, and I get cold sometimes.
I'm still shocked the running heat part.
Well, the window had a hole in it. Did I mention that part? And then there's the thing at the bottom, the fan that's connected. I don't think that was preventing any air from the outside from coming in, and it was dipping into the 30s. So it got cold.
I didn't run heat. It was like 6 or 7 degrees. It was the day before, like it was around the time of Trump's inauguration.
You don't ever run heat, so
I know,
you're Scrooge. So yeah. So anyway, I was able to get up pretty well, and the Texas food kind of goes through me in certain ways, and that's basically a biological alarm clock. Anyway, barely had enough toilet paper to survive in that hotel room. So with that, yeah, every last square used. So with that said, went to church I got to church like 45 minutes early because I got up early, as I mentioned, for reasons that I mentioned. And I was just able to get out of the hotel room. I left my lint roller, but I didn't even use it, but I took it out and just didn't put it back. Only thing I left in the hotel room.
It'll still
And
be there for the next
I
guest.
didn't steal the batteries, and instead I left the lint roller. I'm such a good citizen. So I get there an hour early, or almost an hour early, and just meet some people, and then we worship in the liturgy at Joel Evans Church. Is very interesting. This guy plays hard. He is a bro, but he worships hard too. Like it was a very serious liturgy. They were very serious about worshiping. They don't do the songs first like I'm used to. They do the songs close to the end. Uh,
So what is
they
it? Opening announcements, like
they
prayer.
do announcements at the beginning or very end. And so he says he doesn't want to interrupt the worship with the announcements. So anyway, uh they do like a confession of sins and then
Okay.
sort of a reading of First John 1:8, right? About if you, or is it 1:9, if you confess your sins,
So they do a
God is righteous
confession
to
and
forgive. Yes.
okay, yes, I know that.
So
That
Jeremy
that
in the
is
comments
very
section points out that it was similar to a Presby church,
yes.
and someone criticized it for being Anglican. And it's like, I like Anglicanism. I like Anglicans.
I can literally like no. Does he do a catechism or something? A catechism reading
He doesn't do a catechism. He didn't do a catechism
or some form
question.
of liturgy?
But there's a reading of the law, and the Ten Commandments were
So
read.
so an Old and New Testament reading.
I don't know about a New Testament reading. The sermon was in Matthew, which is funny because my church is in the middle of Matthew, so it's like I can't get away from Matthew. I'm just kidding. Not that I would want to, but yeah. And then they did songs in communion at the very end, and I gotta say that was like the best communion bread and some of the best communion wine that I've ever had.
Better in Texas, right?
I guess so. Yeah, they were serious. We sang the psalms and we sang some hymns. "The Mighty Fortress is Our God" was one of those hymns, by the way. Very expected. I'm unsurprised by that fact. And then we just stuck around a little bit afterwards, and then we just had to get on out, get on out of there. So people underestimate how serious the liturgy is at Joel Webbin's church, but they take it seriously, and I appreciate that. It was reverent. The sermon was pretty good. He relied a lot on Matthew Henry's commentary on Matthew 8, specifically the demons who were possessing descendants of the Girgashites, and Joel Webbin highlighted how Satan's power is being removed. Uh, and talked about how uh, Christ was fighting and going out and sallying into the territory of Baal and Astra and just destroying them. So it was great. It was a good sermon. And I don't think there's any clips that will surface from the sermon, but it was pretty good. Actually, there might be one clip where he does a reference to the names of the demons being Eli and Phil, but if you know, you know. So, all right, that's basically all. I'll take some questions on this.
Yeah, I'm kind of impressed.
I like this.
At your
Did a Creed as well? They did a song by Creed. No, we did not sing Higher. Although someone sang 6 Feet Under at doing karaoke at the bar that we went to, but that song's a banger. I don't want to hear it. So, yeah, I'll do some questions. See if I have any memes for review. And
yeah, I'm kind of impressed at how liturgical. And again, a lot of churches should do a confession of sin in their worship service, considering the idea that it allows us to actually treat sin seriously when we preach, when we confess, do a prayer of confession every Sunday.
it's funny. In my picture with Joel Webbin, someone said that it looked like Dwight and Mose from The Office, and I just laughed. Like they might be making fun of me, but I retweeted that anyway because that's hilarious. I'll take that. I
It's a
don't.
roast. Take it.
That's funny. I can't help but laugh at that. I do have some memes in the meantime. So you get some questions in, and let's do some meme review. Some of these are conference related. Here we go. Corporate needs you to find the difference between this picture and this picture, and I guess it's I don't know who
It's
that
Lord of the
is.
Rings, I
Lord of
think,
the
right?
Rings, maybe. It looks a little animated, so it's hard to tell. And it's Eric Kahn, and they're the same picture. Again, might be making fun of the guy, but can't tell. Then we got Who is James Lindsay by Tucker Carlson. That's a meme template. That's a meme template more than it is a meme itself. But
Now, was the Tucker Carlson interview talked about at all during the?
yes, because Andrew Isker gave the first speech.
Hmm?
So people are like, oh, did you see him on there? People are asking me that. And people who are subscribers to me are asking me that. But maybe they were traveling, because I certainly was traveling when I published that video, because I recorded the night before. So in lieu of doing a Tuesday night recording, we were doing a live stream. So then we got the anti-Semitic baby.
Yes, because that took off while you, well, maybe not while you were traveling, but
That was
probably.
March.
Well, no, because of the clip with that Matt Walsh. Oh,
Okay.
so that meme is older than that. Okay.
Yeah. So we got, oh, look, here comes the far right, but it's about Starship Troopers.
Yeah, because people are trying to argue that the bugs are the good guys, humanity's the bad guys,
Yeah, I mean, this debate
humanity is
happens every
fascist.
spring.
Yeah, it always comes up.
Every
Oh,
spring it
you're
comes up.
media illiterate. It's like no.
No, because the physiognomy in that movie says that the good guys are humans and the bugs are evil, and you have no sympathy for them in the movie if you watch it. Let's see. I'm going to skip that one. Smartest Bill Burr fan and the dumbest Norman McDonald enjoyer. And so the Bill Burr fan is a small brain, while the Norm Macdonald enjoyer is a big brain, even if he's the dumbest. I like that because Bill Burr is the longhouse that we oppose. He is a longhouse individual. He made a
Here's
movie on Netflix. Which movie was that? Was that the Old Dads movie?
old dads or something. And keep in mind,
Yeah,
I mean,
that
he's
is about a movie about him taking on the longhouse and losing. You lose in your
yes.
own movie.
I mean, keep in mind, he went from like being like edgy atheist comedy, and then now he married a woman. His child may or may not even be his.
Wow. That
And I mean, not praising Corey Mahler, but a lot of Corey Mahler's tweets are validated by the example of Bill
so
Burr.
then there's this. I've been saving these for a long time, like the I don't know what you call it. The JD Vance
head
yeah.
memes.
Yeah, like
I mean, it's a little late.
it is a little late. We haven't done a meme review in over a month. Okay, then we got one courtesy of Andrew Tate. It is Ron DeSantis kneeling as Derek Chauvin on Andrew Tate, who's George Floyd in this meme. Not gonna lie, like that makes Ron DeSantis seem pretty cool.
And some might say
Cobra
that's
Tate.
hard.
I mean, hey, Andrew Tate did a good meme here. I can't lie. Or maybe he took a good meme from someone else. And we got another meme. It's a Gavin Ortland meme. Retarded quotes from Dad. Never Trump. Sometimes Harris. Sometimes Harris, always Jesus is on the other side of the cover. And looks like he's reading and enjoying that book.
But he's not liberal.
And then we got Joel Berry, everyone and everyone else as the Trump, JD Vance, and Zelensky meme. We got Friends, Seinfeld, Always Sunny. I don't know if we've already done these. Have we? I don't know. Yeah, we did some of these.
Some of these.
Okay, so we're down. I know we did not.
We are caught up.
We didn't do the George Floyd meme, so that one,
which is also timely because
that one needed to get shown. All right, we got some questions in the queue because it's always good to do some meme review. I had some in the yeah. Joel responded to that tweet with "It's true, yeah." yes, because we can take jokes about ourselves.
Oh, that's Gimli. What's wrong with you? We got told on the.
I'm not a Lord of the Rings person. Okay, I
it's
haven't seen the movies in like
of
10 years. It's been since I've seen the movies, and then
before
those 10 years, I didn't watch any of the movies. So give me a little slack. here because I'm not autistic about Lord of the Rings. Also, John Harris, he said, if you know more about Lord of the Rings or some fantasy world than you know about the history of your own country, shame on you. He might not have said the shame on you part, but it was implied. Uh,
Also, don't.
you know every SpongeBob episode, but you don't know the main character of Lord of the Rings. Probably at this point in time, there's more SpongeBob episodes I've not seen than I have seen because it's the old first 3 seasons of SpongeBob that are really goated, and the movies are pretty good. Plankton movie was actually pretty good. That's on Netflix, and then
So we have any? I mean, again, there was a
singles.
singles event.
I don't know
Obviously,
anyone
you
who went
probably.
to that. I didn't meet anyone that went to that, so it's hard to say. I don't know how awkward it was. It wasn't. There were maybe some people that might have been pearl clutchers there at the event, which is pretty odd. But I don't. I don't think that was. I don't know if that was a whole lot. Just going off of what I've heard or not heard. But
Because
this conference was for the
Ogden's.
bros, which is very easy for me to say as a happily married, loyal man.
Yeah, you went to the bar with the men, not the women.
Exactly. And I didn't hit on anyone at the bar either.
And there's no hotel room worthy to.
I did not see any what's it uh what's one of the slangs they use? Yeah, I didn't see any hotel hoes. Didn't see any of that. Let's see.
Do you have a super chat? Right.
Oh. It was great to meet you. You're chill, bro, and I carried you on the shuffleboard. Glad we're friends. Okay, I had my moments, but I am just inconsistent. Let's see. Has Joel largely overcome the micro controversy of his ministerial problems of 10 years ago? Was it discussed at all? It was a little. It was made. There were a lot of references to it made by Joel, and he also said during the Sunday service, he said something along the lines of his friend, and he named his friend. I won't name his friend. Has all the dirt on him. If Eli wanted to know worse things about Joel Webben, he should get it out of him. But that guy's not going to betray his trust uh, to Joel Webben. So the controversy was discussed in passing, but it wasn't like there wasn't a sit down conversation about it. He didn't like defend himself about it, and he didn't want to uh
Make the conference about that.
yeah, he didn't want to take any time to really address it because first of all, this is a sin that's already been adjudicated. And I have criticisms about how the church adjudicated it or whether it was a church or not. How his overseers adjudicated that at the time might not have been right, but he still obeyed them, and you can't just come after him 10 years later for obeying the instruction that was given to him, even if the instruction was wrong. So,
I mean, again, since the question's asking more broadly, I would say that the controversy has more or less subsided, and
uh,
they're forced to move on to something else. And
what they're going to want to hang him with it for a long time, but just vibe with the boys and just don't give in is kind of like my reaction to that because being disqualified 10 years ago does not make him disqualified now, and I don't agree with the term permanently disqualifying in general. Like, I think the things that are permanently disqualifying are also crimes that you won't be able to get requalified for because you'll be either headless or in jail for, a long time. So, my thoughts on that. Like, Robert Morris should have been prosecuted at the time, so he wouldn't have been restored. Is my view on that. So, I agree with that law that Brad Little signed in Idaho the other day on firing squad for certain people. So, all right, yeah, I saw a number of guy-girl pairings with red lanyards as the weekend went on. Okay, so statistics man saw some stats. All righty. Again, I don't know. They weren't exact about giving out the lanyards. I know they gave me a black lanyard. I don't know if they saw my symbol of loyalty, but it is what it is. Did you get a lot of interviews or guest opportunities with the speakers or good business deals? I think we'll get some interviews out of this. I got Thursday interview with Wesley Todd is confirmed. I'll make the live stream on Wednesday night. So that interview was also planned before the conference, though. So I can't quite take credit for that. I will say this: the only person I didn't get to speak to CJ Angle, but also missed the opportunity to speak to JD Hall. I wasn't able to talk to him. So I talked to everyone. I had conversations with most of the other speakers, but I missed out on JD Hall. I maybe saw him once or twice, but he eluded me. Or someone else like Joel Webbin. I think the first time I saw him, Joel Webbin got to me first. So, and then introduced me to the life of cigars. Anyway, and I think the business deals might come as far as the other part of that question. But it's all about forming relationships. So, any other questions? I think we can wrap up. Thank you all. You are a great crowd tonight. And if you like Evangelical Dark Web, do also subscribe to the channel if you're new. That's what helps with those magical YouTube algorithms. And we have a Patreon-like system that you can support us at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. Have a book, Winning Not Winsome, 10 Commandments of Spiritual Warfare. And that's about it. Stay based. Christ is King. And we will catch you on